Okay, and welcome to Chapter 11, Communicable Diseases, in our pursuits of international health. As always, we'll start with the learning objectives. And here we're going to look at determinants, the key concepts of prevention and transmission, cost and consequence, some examples and some really good case studies, and then, as always, looking at key challenges in the future prevention and control. So, after you go through the vignettes, read that at the beginning of the chapter, as always. And we're looking at communicable diseases and what we may have thought in the United States is something of the past, but it's certainly not true here in the States and in low and middle income areas. So this opening couple of paragraphs sets the stage for that. This column takes you through the chapter and how we're going to address some different diseases at first, looking at some case studies, and then followed up with the challenges of the future. So I'll go ahead and mark that for you. In this table, we talk about the Millennium Development Goals and how those are related to communicable diseases. So look at those goals. They've got the 8 goals listed there for this. On the next page, we talk about some key terms and concepts. So these bullets are really important to have an understanding of before you get into this chapter. And I'm going to highlight these bullets as well. And then at the top of this, table 11.2. Now go through and make sure you have a good understanding of these and read these a few times so that when they come up in the text in this chapter, it's going to make sense to you. The last thing we're going to talk about here is drug resistance. Just like everything else is evolving, the pathogens, the bugs we're talking about in this chapter, they are too evolving, just trying to live like the rest of us. So they have overcome some of our drugs and things to try to eradicate these things. They're evolving and trying to fight for their own lives and health. 36% of total deaths, 40% of the dailies lost, communicable diseases. So that's why this is so important that we spend some time on it. Okay, as always, look at the tables, look over those. We come here, I'm going to highlight this. There's little difference in males and females, as you may suspect, in how some of these are spread. It really doesn't affect males and females, except you think about HIV and how it spread. Now the cost and consequences, I'm going to go ahead and highlight the whole thing here, and I've pointed out different things on my text, but look over these and see what we talk about from the children all the way down to the emerging and re-emerging infectious diseases and how these affect from schooling to work to the spread and the consequences of these diseases. Next, we have a section on the emerging and re-emerging diseases. I'm going to highlight that. And just a note here about the first recorded epidemic down to the bubonic plague, and then what we have coming up today. This whole next section I've highlighted for you, and it comes down to 60% of these events are coming from animals. Now, what you may not think about because of our culture we live in the U.S. is that they came from wildlife and wildlife that related to. Now, we think of wildlife, you have to think about the wildlife they're talking about here are the mosquitoes for malaria, ticks, and other things. A little history of some emerging infectious diseases starting in '67, going down to SARS in 2002. Look over that. Then on the next page, we talk about the spread of these and the change in landscape. And the change in landscape, what they're really talking about is the change of where people are living. As we have more populations grow, they're up against the rainforest. Up in New England, we're up against the forest where the deer ticks are. And it's just, as the populations grow around the world, we have new issues because we are encroaching on more and more animals. Now, factors that contribute to drugs becoming, pathogens becoming drug resistant. We've got some bullets here. We talk about the use of drugs more commonly. Patients don't take all their drugs, and some of the pathogen survives, and then it's basically been inoculated against the drug, just as we inoculate children. In this next one, we talk about the spread of disease after World War II and how up until HIV, we thought that we had conquered the infectious communicable diseases. The cost, next on our topics. Table, I wanted to point this out because in table 11:10 at the top of the page, you can see the cost there, and it's quite amazing what's coming back that many people may have thought that was a thing in the past, and what it's costing us now and what it may cost in the future. And I'll scroll on down. Foundation for Strengthening the Capacity to Address focuses on surveillance systems, laboratories, and when you just think about those two things alone, the cost for a low resource, low income area, we're talking two of the things that are the most expensive. Here we're talking about the Global Outbreak Alert and Response Network. Again, where you have a limited system, the idea of having good record keeping and good tracking mechanisms is somewhat limited. Talk about the Mexico swine flu issue. I was in Mexico right after that, and what a good job the Mexican government did notifying the world and basically closing its shores down until that was controlled. Kind of the opposite of what happened in China with the SARS outbreak in 2003. Okay. Now we'll go down and start talking about some of the different diseases we're talking about. And of course, we'll start off with HIV. And probably you've heard more about this one than the other ones. So read through this. Pay attention to, let me go back up and highlight table 11:11 for you, talking about the resistance. Now with HIV, I'm going to highlight some numbers here for you. 33 million people worldwide, and that's a few years old, but of course there's no way to get current, up-to-date, real-time numbers. And as we've read and talked about before, some of these numbers come from systems that may not be the best in generating data. So I'm going to go ahead and highlight these paragraphs for you, and notice here 15 to 24 new HIV infections, age 15 to 24. Coming down to the cost on the next section, in the absence of treatment, become sicker, full-fledged age, and that comes down to the cycle. And if you'll notice here, one of the consequences, and we hear about this in sub-Saharan Africa, are the large number of orphans. And notice what they're defining as an orphan here is 15 years or younger. I dare say that's not something we would consider an orphan in the United States, but just make special note that they are talking about 15 years or younger. Okay. Now we're going to go down to some of the successful prevention programs and what a good program is based on, so pay particular attention to that. And same on the next page, a case study in Thailand. And the new evidence about circumcision, I will highlight that for you. And coming down to the bottom, and we start talking about the new challenges in the fight of HIV. Now, here I'm going to make a special note, and I'm going to post a link to a TED lecture that's talking about this. It's a great TED lecture. I really recommend you watch it, maybe as you read this section. And we're going to change from HIV to tuberculosis. And I'm going to highlight about tuberculosis and an aerosol droplet. Just think about the spread of tuberculosis the next time you're in an elevator or in a crowded room and someone coughs. Do you really think that could be a life-threatening event when that person coughs? A lot of people around the world may think that. The nature of latent TB and how important that is, and what it means to have someone walking around that is not ill from TB, but they are spreading it nonetheless. And here we're talking about that with an untreated person with TB. TB basic facts, table 1113. And the next section talks about the problems of TB and the HIV interface. So give some special attention to that. Now moving over to the cost and consequences of TB. It talks about the problem with a large number of people being ill for such a long time, what that cost. You can see here 3 months of wages. Think about what that would do to you personally if you had missed work for 3 months and had no safety net. And here's the stigma. Now this is a difference between males and females somewhat, and how females in India can be shunned, rejected with TB. Next, I'm going to highlight the treatment strategies and DOTS. So make sure you are familiar with DOTS. I'll highlight that for you. And on the next, the plan to try to stop the spread of TB. Now we go to malaria. And we talked about coughing with TB in a crowded elevator. Think about going outside this summer and never being bitten by a mosquito. Having worked in some areas with malaria, you rethink everything you do, whether you're outside at night. It's just a different way of life that most of us can't relate to at all. So I'll highlight that for you. I'm going to addressing the burdens of TB. Make sure you spend time there. And going to the challenges of what we're trying to do globally with TB. Now from TB, we'll go to diarrheal diseases. And what we're talking about here is the spread of bacteria, virus, parasites, basically through some sort of a fecal oral contamination. And the big concern here is clean water. And we've talked about that, and we know how important water is and how few people have clean water. Again, something we take so for granted here in the States. And we've talked about in other classes and activities we have that it's estimated the average female in the world walks 5 miles each day to carry water. That trip brings several other issues outside the need for and use of clean water. The neglected tropical diseases, I want you to read this section, and on 11:14 it sort of tells you what we're talking about. We're not going to go into great details on this one, but look over those and you'll go down and you'll see the future challenges of these. I'm skipping all the way down to page 262. And future challenges for the NTDs. The big problem we have was we have a lot of hope in new technology, but remember, new technology is created today, and growing populations and their needs and demands change the challenges every day. So we may, what works to technology that works today may not work tomorrow. Different policies. The 3 policies and programs follow to illustrate the key points. So look over those. The public-private partnerships, we're seeing a lot of this. This one talks about a program with Lilly. We talk about public-private with the Gates Foundation. So I'm going to highlight the titles here for you and ask that you look over those. And that does seem to be the future of these global issues, the public-private combinations of approaches. Now look over the case studies as always. Read those. There's a few pages of case studies, and that's going to take us, the case studies take us into the future challenges on page 371. I'm going to highlight this, and then the political commitment to this. You think political commitment right now and think of the Affordable Care Act and think about trying to get things accomplished in some nations that are so divided, where you have some people with good health care and some people that do not have access to clean water. So that's a huge political divide there. Then we're talking about poverty, lack of empowerment, knowledge, and the issues revolving around that. Then we go to the successes in controlling have been built on back to the private-public partnerships. Something else we need in the future is surveillance. And this is, again, the overall system. How strong is the system? Lack of trained personnel to deal with these issues, down to somehow to come up with a good balance between prevention and treatment. Do we not treat the sick to keep those from becoming sick? It's a huge ethical dilemma. And then the financing of treatment, prevention. How do we put funds aside for the prevention when there's so many other challenges going on? Some of the claims, possible cures, scientific and technical challenges. We need to come up with models to deal with these issues in the low and middle income countries. Another issue is the treatment of HIV and trying to keep it from becoming spread to other areas and how we deal with that. And then the chapter does a good job summing up everything in its main messages. Okay, that's a quick overview for you. I hope that helps, and make sure you watch the TED video.